I'm Jane Hansen, and this week in the arena, the sacrament of marriage, the devastation of divorce, and the mysteries of the annulment process. The statistics are alarming. 40 to 60% of all new marriages end in divorce, and according to a 2008 Gallup poll survey, more Americans than ever, 70%, believe divorce is morally acceptable. Whatever happened to till death do us part? Joining us now, Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and Bob and Melinda Nobbs, New York representatives for the Worldwide Marriage Encounter. And welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. You two have been married for
45 years.
45 years. So you kind of know what the secret is. You want to share?
It's a lot of years, a lot of secrets. But I would say the main one is communication. We are very careful about keeping our communication process going on a daily basis. And it's helped us to get into areas that perhaps we never would have touched had we not had that sensitivity to it.
And communication certainly includes prayer, communication with God, because He's a very important part of our sacrament, and that's where everything happens.
Mm-hmm. Monsignor, you maybe don't see a lot of couples right now that the happily married ones don't come to see you.
Well, I mean that's not true. You have a lot of happily married couples come to mass and
right. No,
they
but I mean
participate.
if they're coming to seek your counsel or your help.
Yeah,
so,
right. They're not. If there's not a problem, they're not coming to present a problem. But you do see a lot of happily married couples who are coming to church, and in fact, I think in part the reason why they're happily married is because they're praying together, and they have this avenue of communication. And I think that one of the reasons why the statistics all seem to bear out that religious people tend to have fewer incidences of divorce. Not to say that Catholics have less incidents of divorce, but people who are practicing faith have fewer incidents of divorces because I think a worldview is different, and the worldview being one I think that is a sacrificial worldview, that it's not looking at simply what I'm getting out of the relationship, but what I'm really giving, what I'm offering, and I think that makes a big difference. At least that's my experience.
You both are nodding your head with that one. You participate. I'm sorry. Did you want to say something?
No, you don't always realize when you're saying yes on your wedding day that you're saying yes to two parts: to love one another as I have loved you here, but that you are also committing your sacrament to the church and to love others and to the world.
Right. You marry a man one day, and 45 years later you wake up next to somebody who maybe is a very different man, right?
As you are a different woman.
Yeah. There are changes, definitely.
Yeah.
But I do think that this communication that takes place every day has helped us to grow together. And so often couples kind of go on their own paths, separate paths. They grow in different directions and may come to a point, if they haven't communicated with each other, that they just find that they're not the same people, in that they don't have that compatibility and that tendency to love one another.
When you talk about communicating, you two really are in the process of helping other couples either find what they once had, or to grow together, yes, or to help deal with the potential for problems in the Worldwide Marriage Encounter. Can you tell us what that is?
Well, Worldwide Marriage Encounter is a movement in the Catholic Church, and it had its basic origins in Spain, where there was a priest, Father Calvo, who worked with many of the poor, and the couples just were so discouraged as to having so little, and they didn't see anything for their future. He really wanted to come up with a program to help them experience how rich they were in that they had each other, and what that sacrament of marriage really meant. And so he brought this program to the United States, and a Jesuit priest, Father Chuck Gallagher, was so excited by it that he went and he got couples, and it spread. So it's basically to make you turn toward each other and find God in the center.
Bob and Melinda, I'm curious. One of the questions I think that always poses, do you think that maybe the cultural context in which you grew up and were married 45 years ago was different than today, and maybe that that context 45 years ago, the values with which you grew up, better prepared you to sustain a marriage than the context in which people are getting married today in.
Well, for me, I certainly grew up in a family that divorce was not known at all, but Bob had a different experience.
My mother and father were divorced when I was 8, and I think for me, it made me more determined that that would not be a part of my life, and that it would never let anything like that happen.
That must have been, when you were 8 years old, that must have been such a stigma because nobody got divorced then, right?
It was.
Yeah.
It was, well, he's coming from a broken home was the common phrase that was used. So it was like children coming from that kind of a relationship were thought of as somehow defective in many ways.
Somehow that they wouldn't have the moral competency to make decisions and that sort of thing. Was that an issue for your parents when you were getting married?
No, not
It
really.
wasn't, yeah.
Bob's mother passed away very early,
Yeah.
and they were separated, so there wasn't really a big influence directly at that time.
So the Worldwide Marriage Encounter really talks about weekends where you bring couples together, couples of all ages, all different ethnic backgrounds. I guess the one unifying criteria would be that they're Catholics.
The majority of couples on the weekend are Catholic. However, we do open it to couples of all faiths, or we've even had atheists on the weekend who find something special.
You have atheists on the weekend that find something they can.
Yes,
Okay.
they can get into I mean, we're talking about basically fundamental principles of life and love that they are true of everybody. We give the weekend from the perspective of the Catholic sacraments of marriage and holy orders. And I should mention on the side that this is a very enriching experience for priests and religious as well. They find very often that it helps them get in touch with their spouse, the church, on a much deeper level.
Have you done this?
I haven't, but I think that the relationship, certainly of a priest, is seen in and particularly his promise of celibacy, is seen in light of marriage, and really there's a relationship, an intimate relationship between the celibate priest and marriage. And if you don't see the context of celibacy in terms of its service, it loses its dimension. If you don't see it, in other words, you can't see yourself as a priest as just being a bachelor. Because if you see that and what that entails, being a bachelor, right, making your own decisions at your own times, not in the context of respecting other people, something is really lost in terms of the ministry.
In addition to that, I mean, we see so beautifully, you know, the priest married to Christ, but the body of Christ is the church.
Right.
And so we're the church, the people, so we're really your spouse.
Yeah.
So, and so many parallels in Scripture are, you know, the bride of Christ.
Oh, sure, exactly. You know about another group organization that's called Retrovi?
We do. There have been a couple of spin-offs that came from Worldwide Marriage Encounter. One for couples who are really in a troubled marriage. There is either an addiction or third parties involved, something where the basic trust is broken and they may be on the brink of separation or divorce. And it is called Retrovi. And it's an experience which seems to get more deeply into the misery that those couples are experiencing because of that break of trust.
Help give them some tools to be able to deal with it?
Yes, and it's more structured than the Worldwide Marriage Encounter Weekend in that there are mandatory follow-up sessions. And both the husband and wife have to agree to come to this. I mean, they're interviewed separately.
Well, it sounds like that for those 4 marriages, there's help with an organization like yours to help make the marriage even stronger and better than it is. And for those that have some difficulties, there are places to go where you can get the help that might be really crucial to keeping that marriage alive. I just have a quick final question before we take a break. There's a lot of myths out there about marriage, one of which is marriage will always be romantic and it will make me happy. And you would say to that?
I would say Father Chuck Gallagher, who started this thing, had a banner on his wall. Love is a hell of a lot of hard work. And, I guess that says it more than anything else. The romance is great, the romance is fine, and the romance is probably more vibrant with us even than it was back in our courting days. But it's there because we put a lot of effort into it.
And that's, it's interesting. One of the things that surprised me as a newly ordained priest and as a young priest is a lot of my friends were getting married, and you start to get to know people in marriage, and people share with you something which is different. They don't share this outside. Is the lack of intimacy in marriage, which here we are in a sexually obsessed society, and people look at me and they say, "Oh, you're celibate," but I choose celibacy. I start to recognize that a lot of people get married. They didn't choose celibacy, but they're living celibate lives, and it's very, very painful in marriage, particularly. And I think it does get to this question of communication. Like something has profoundly gone wrong.
Yeah.
I would say that on the weekend, we give couples a series of tools to work with as they go home and really try to deepen their intimacy. Yeah. One of which is our sexual relationship. And I think it's gotten kind of a bad rap over the centuries, even from the church at times. But the importance of that part of our relationship can't be understated. Yep. And it's communication on that level, communication on the level of prayer, communication on everyday stuff and feelings.
Communication on every level is the bottom line. Thank you so much, Bob and Melinda, for being with us. We really do appreciate it. Monsignor, you're going to stay right here. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by regular contributor Elizabeth Scalia and a member of the Diocesan Tribunal who can clear up some of the myths and misconceptions about the annulment process. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our topic today is marriage, divorce, and annulments. And joining us in this segment are Elizabeth Scalia, contributor to First Things and author of the blog, The Anchoress, Father Thomas Mahalski, pastor of St. Joseph's Parish in Queens and a member of the Diocesan Tribunal, and of course, Monsignor Harrington. So, marriage today, not as many people are getting married, they're not having as many church weddings, and of course, we all know about the rate of divorce. What is all of that?
Well, as I was just sharing with you before we came on air, we live in a society right now where people don't even respect the institution of marriage from a civil point of view, if we could say that. The city of New York gave statistics a while back that comparing the decade 1980 to 1990 to the decade 1990 to 2000, that the city issued 50% less marriage licenses than it did in the previous decade. People just seem to fall into the trap of cohabitating. It's a lot easier. There's no real commitment. The freedom to walk away when you want is always there. And that seems to be the prevailing mindset nowadays amongst a lot of our younger people.
Which must be something that goes completely against the Catholic principles and you as a priest and you, Elizabeth.
You know what the problem is that the problem is that when you don't have a commitment in a relationship, you don't have the depth of a relationship. Commitment is when I choose you against all others, and I do that eternally. It echoes throughout time. That changes the nature of the relationship. And so really it's not that it goes against church rules what it does is it impoverishes our relationships. And that's really what the problem is.
So you're talking about an impoverishment that goes all across all society, no matter if you're a Christian
think about
or
how it
religious.
Impoverishes families. Think about how it impoverishes families and how it impoverishes families, not simply children, but extended family, brothers-in-law, sisters-in-law. I mean, the whole fabric of society is undermined when there isn't this commitment, I take you forever.
Yeah.
That is a vow, and it's made before God. And the point was made earlier that this is every bit a vowed vocation. Marriage is every bit a vowed vocation, just like your priesthood vow or the vow of a religious. I think maybe what young people might argue, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, obviously, is that you will have, I don't know, 8 years of formation before you're a priest. You'll have 8 years to kind of figure out if this is a commitment that you are really going to make for the rest of your life. And a nun has 7 or 8 years of formation before she makes her final vows. When you get married, you don't have that sort of formation. What you have is a whole lifetime of formation from your parents' marriage and your aunts and your uncles. And if they've had lousy marriages, you've had a lousy formation.
Right.
And then how do you then step into a vowed lifelong relationship with very poor formation?
Well, so your point would be then that we need help in learning what marriage is and what it entails and how hard it can be, because what was the phrase that Bob Nobbs just used a few minutes ago about love is the most difficult job, something like that? Mm-hmm. So we have this divorce rate, and it's very disturbing to the Catholic Church that people divorce.
Well, here's the good news. In New York State, we don't have no-fault divorce. This is the only state in the Union, I believe, that does not have no-fault divorce. In other words, the presumption in New York State is that if you are going to terminate a marriage, there has to be a cause for termination of marriage. Now, there are a lot of advocates actually right now who are trying to change that. But I think the good news is in New York State, the law, which has a pedagogical impact, says that you can't just walk away from marriage, that marriage is important and has a value, and there has to be a real reason in order to walk away from marriage. And so that's the good news, first, in New York State. I think in terms of the divorce rate, I think the bad news is, and I say this as someone, my parents are divorced. They divorced when I was in college. And I can tell you, it was a pretty painful experience, right? Because I was in college, my siblings were younger, my 2 sisters were younger, and it threw the family into complete upheaval. But I can remember at the time really almost despairing, thinking that what's going to happen to my sisters, what's happening to our family unit, how do you get together for the holidays? I mean, it changes everything.
The whole thing been a lie. I have a friend whose parents divorced when she was 20, and it just sucked the foundation of her life out from her, and she didn't know if she could ever count on love anywhere. Because
I remember thinking I wasn't sure if I could be, one of the reasons I left the seminary and ultimately came back was I wasn't sure, can I make a commitment? Am I going to be able to make a life commitment? I don't want to make a commitment and not be able to, honor that commitment. It challenges everything.
So what are you saying then? Are you saying that the heck with annulment and we should just let divorce be a part of the Catholic Church now, or not?
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this does pose it poses a problem, and the way in which we talk about this is profoundly misunderstood. And I can tell you it was misunderstood by me, and I was in the seminary. Right. So I was thinking, if I'm in this environment and I can't understand it, I can't imagine someone who has a tangential relationship with the Church understanding it.
So this is part of what you do.
This is part of what I've been doing for 24 years.
Okay, and there's a lot of, you have the same problem? Is that what you just said?
No. I said I've been doing this and hearing much of what Monsignor said for 24 years that I'm working in the tribunal. Mm-hmm. 25 years ordained, 24 years working there. Part-time, now full-time as the adjutant judicial vicar. Many people have that mindset. You pay, you're going to get a pass from the Church to do what you want. I think there's a basic misunderstanding amongst most of our faithful in what this quote-unquote annulment is. First of all, we don't even like to use the term annulment. That's not a good term. It's more correctly and more technically called a declaration of the invalidity of the marriage. Mm-hmm. Okay? There is a lot of misconception out there, and a lot of that misconception comes from misinformation that people get on the internet nowadays, from people who supposedly claim that they know the answers to this whole Catholic annulment situation. There's a difference between what a divorce and annulment really state, which I don't think most Catholics understand. A divorce is this marriage is over now when the judge signs on the dotted line. An annulment states that there was never a true sacramental marriage as the Church teaches marriage and understands marriage to be
but that's
from the
part
get-go.
I don't get.
Well, that's what we have to explore when they come to the tribunal. What was it that prevented that sacramental marriage from being entered into? There are many things. Could it have been a lack of due discretion? Could it have been a cycle
What's that mean?
that they were immature, that they didn't really prepare for this, that they entered into it with a mindset at times that if this doesn't work, I walk. And many young people do that.
It's interesting that we say this with marriage. We don't say this with priesthood. I mean, you could potentially go for a declaration of lack of discretion with priesthood, but we don't do that, do we?
Well, we really can't. There's a
Well, that can happen, can't
Well,
it?
we would have to declare the orders invalid, but that would be a whole different procedure.
Right.
The tribunal's
like a
not
path
involved
you
in
might
Rome
have.
would be.
All right, there's so many different issues surrounding this. I guess, and we do have to take a break here, but just if you could make the answer to this question really quick, if there is an annulment or an decision of invalidity of the marriage, what does that do to the status of the children?
Absolutely nothing. It does not make them illegitimate, as most people think. They're born of what's called a putative marriage. Just as the divorce doesn't affect the status when they say this marriage is over, nor does the annulment.
All right,
Children are not a mistake. They're gifts from God.
Yes, that they are. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion and have some final thoughts about marriage, divorce, and annulments. Stay with us. Welcome back. Continuing our conversation on the annulment process. There are a number of different reasons, way too many for you to get into here. Just give us a couple of examples.
Like I said before, a lack of due discretion. If there is some sort of psychological problem, there's another one called force and fear, reverential fear, which we've come up against with some of our parishioners from various, especially Asian cultures, where the parents arrange the marriage and they go into it because they can't dishonor the parents by disobeying this arrangement that was made. And then it doesn't work. And then
So the bottom line is that they come to people like yourself, to the tribunal, and they say, we believe that our marriage should be annulled or be declared invalid for this reason. And you look at it on a case-by-case basis.
correct.
And I mean, it must still be heart-wrenching in the sense that there is a reason that they need to have that, but there's also some positive results.
Yeah, it is always a very difficult thing for people to bring up again, a very difficult part of their life. But I'm always amazed how many people say to me that, you know, Father, when I started this, I was really upset with you guys. I really didn't want to rehash all of this, but I found that by doing this, I've got a certain sense of peace. I've been able to bring some closure to this part of my life. I can move on. I feel that my relationship with God and the church is going to be better and stronger because of this.
And you've had bloggers discuss this subject.
Yeah, and I was just thinking and listening to Monsignor, this is bureaucratism in one respect, but it's also a really healing ministry that the annulment tribunals are engaged in. And I think that people lose sight of the fact that they're being helped to identify, you know, possibly a pattern of their life that they will continue making if they're not encountering it and really addressing it. And so I think that an annulment gives an opportunity to own what you've done and really examine it closely, prevent you from making those mistakes again, which is not something you will see happening in a secular divorce.
And then with the annulment process, once that has happened, it means you're free to remarry in the church.
That's right. I think the important thing to note is by virtue of a person being divorced doesn't mean they can't go to communion and receive. The issue is really the remarriage outside of the church, which precludes going to communion. So I think that's very important because a lot of people don't go to communion or don't go to church because they feel, I'm a bad Catholic, I've had this happen. It's not by virtue of the divorce. It's really the question of remarriage. And the question about the remarriage is not, you know, the marriage takes place not because a priest blesses it. it's because of two people being brought together, right? I mean,
Right.
it's the two people that are marrying each other. And so it's that commitment of one to the other that is important. And I think that that's what we try to bless, right? So that the couple receives the grace for that enduring bond in terms
Yeah,
of
they're,
marriage.
they're the ministers of the sacrament, one to the other. The priest is the officiant or the deacon who, in the name of the church, accepts that exchange of consent and blesses it.
One of the criticisms that is often leveled, especially against the Church in the United States, is that they're granting too many annulments. How do you respond to that?
Well, there was a time where that was a prevailing mindset, I think, from the powers that be, and I mean the powers across the Atlantic over in Rome. However, you know, if you look at it now, we're not granting all that many because we just don't have that many people getting married anymore. To put numbers on it would be a very difficult thing. We have a different approach at times. Psychology, which we sometimes use, and psychiatric evaluation has a little more meaning and depth here than it does in Europe, in certain places in Europe. So you have to look at the whole situation.
And I'm sure that, again, we talked about it being a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely.
Whatever it is, there has been a painful process that people have gone through to reach this state of their life. And at this point, you're helping them so that they can go back to the church and not have the stigma that being a divorced Catholic
And as Liz said,
might
helping them to identify whatever the problem was so it's not repeated again. I always tell people, you know, when you go shopping and you see the sign, come back, we want your business again. Well, we love you at the tribunal and we want to help you, but we don't want your business again. We don't want you to repeat the same mistake.
Last word, Elizabeth?
Do not be afraid. If you have been divorced, you know, pursue this. Make yourself as fully able to participate in your church life as you can. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah. I think that the church is really interested in people who are in all different circumstances of life. And unfortunately, a lot of people make a decision that they're not holy enough to go to church, right? They're afraid of being a hypocrite because they have difficulties happening in their life. And that's precisely why we do go to church and why we take advantage of the sacraments of the church. And so I think it really is, I can tell you in my own family, after going through this process, it's been a great blessing.
All right. Thank you very much. We thank all of you for being here, as always. And thank you for watching us. Remember, you don't need a TV to watch the net. We're always online at netny.net. For all of us here, I'm Jane Hanson. I'll see you next time in the arena.